I'm very happy to be here in Montenegro for the first time and in this beautiful city of Tivat. And to talk a little bit about leadership in a revolving world, because I think it's fair to say that Europe, and actually the whole world, has been experiencing multiple crises in the past decades. We can even talk about a perma-crisis, a financial crisis in 2008, a pandemic, and a brutal war in Europe after Russia's senseless and illegal invasion. The conflicts around the globe are more than we have seen since the Second World War. The number of people forced to flee conflict, human rights violations, and persecution has now reached 120 million for the first time on record. As we deal with human displacements resulting from the pandemic and wars, the consequences of the climate crisis have become clearer. The climate crisis poses a severe threat to our lives, our health, and the structural pillars of our societies, to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And sadly, we also have a growing trend of climate denialism, even though the scientific evidence is very clear. And that is part of yet another crisis. Science is under siege. Science, which should be the foundation of everything that policymakers decide. At the same time, we are also experiencing a new world of technologies. Technologies that are changing our labor markets, our ways of communicating, how we gather knowledge, changing the political debates. And at the same time that new technologies have an enormous amount of opportunities, they are also changing the world and transferring power to the tech giants, because we all spend more and more time in a virtual world, while traditional media is declining and disinformation is growing, which creates yet another crisis for democratically elected politicians, where people stay in their own online bubbles and political discourse becomes more and more polarized. And now we seem to be on the edge of a global trade war, which we still don't see where it's going to lead us. Showing leadership in times of a perma-crisis is not a simple task. It demands of you to remain true to your values while guiding your people through insecurity and unprecedented times. I served as the Minister of Education, Culture and Science after the economic crisis which hit Iceland with extreme force in 2008. Later, during my time as Prime Minister from 2017 to 24, of course I had to tackle a pandemic like all other leaders of the world, a war in Europe, and 7 volcanic eruptions in Iceland, which among other things resulted in a town of 3,000 people, which is about 1% of the Icelandic population had to be evacuated. And at the same time, we, as the rest of the world, saw an increase in exaggerated weather, avalanches, and landslides with severe consequences. All of this is, of course, a learning process for society, for a country, for me personally, and really demonstrates the importance of resilience in difficult times. Confronted with all these crises, it does not come as a surprise, however, that democracy has come under strain, because we see non-democratic states with no interest in the promotion of equality or human rights emerging as major players on the international scene. We also see democratic states become less democratic with weakening institutions. And we should be very careful, because democratic rights can be suppressed or they can slip away. And for this reason, we should not take them as a given. They must be nurtured, protected, and fought for. If there is one lesson to be learned from the failure of the international response to fascism in the 1930s, it is that democracies must stay together to protect hard-won political rights and freedoms. I mentioned new technologies, which bring us enormous opportunities, but also bring new challenges to our values. Because we spend an increasing amount of time in our digital world, and it's not just the young people. I have 3 teenage sons, and we intend to talk about that the young people stay more in the digital world. But that applies to all of us. And just measure your screen time, and you will see that I'm telling the truth here. And we must be very mindful that we are not all of us digital natives. I was not born into a digital world. So therefore, we need to be very mindful of what this digital world means. For example, algorithms will be exactly as flawed as their creators and the data they are based on, because artificial intelligence is based on data. So, for example, if we have more data on men than women, the algorithms are mainly designed by men and not women, there is a fair chance that new technologies might even increase gender inequality. And that is the thought. Another example of a gender inequality in the other direction is the fact that most jobs consist, at least partly, of tasks that will be overtaken by technology in the near future. Some will be hit harder than others. Traditional men's jobs will probably be impacted more immediately, while it remains questionable whether technology will ever replace some of the traditional women's jobs in care and education. Migrants are more likely to hold jobs that will disappear. The rural areas will probably be more impacted than urban areas. These challenges call for leaders with clear values and responses that ensure ethical values, human rights, equality, and well-being. Dear guests, the President talked about education, and I agree. One of the keys for the future in these turbulent times is education that's accessible for all, from early childhood education to universities. Education is one of the most important tools that we have to build a more equal and a just society. And it's also a key to preserve our democracies. Strong and equal schools are a necessary foundation for strong and prosperous societies, and they are also the key to make informed and data-based decisions for the greater good. Our students have to understand, for example, the new technologies, and they have to understand the impact they have, for example, on political debate. But we must also think about humanity in our education systems. It's not enough to understand technology. We must also understand humanity. Education is one of the pillars in the well-being economy project. During my time as Prime Minister of Iceland, we joined a group of countries within the well-being economy government project, which that model actually tackles the shortcomings of the GDP-centered approach, entails a commitment to building an alternative future, focusing on the well-being of current and future generations and inclusive growth. And one of the main goals is that economic policies should support collective well-being. That is how happy and healthy a population is, approaching quality of life not only from a monetary measure, but from a well-being perspective. The Well-Being Economy Project is an attempt to do the right thing in turbulent times. And because we're talking about leadership, it's also an example of caring leadership in challenging times. Now, finally, because I promised myself when I entered politics, I was active in politics for over 20 years, I decided that I would never give a speech without mentioning gender equality. Iceland has been on top of the World Economic Forum list on gender equality for many, many years, and I'm very proud of that fact. I was born in 1976, and at that time we did not have that much gender equality in Iceland. Only 3 out of 63 parliamentarians were women, for example. I was in my mother's womb in 1975 when Icelandic women from different political parties, from different sectors, demonstrated the gender pay gap, and they left their workplaces at the moment they stopped getting paid, which was quite early in the day. And they gathered in tens of thousands, and at that time my mother was at that protest, so I say that I was there because I was in her womb. Many things have happened since. Most importantly, early childhood education for all children from early age, and a shared parental leave, which means that the parents actually share parental leave equally. And now that parental leave is 12 months, 6 months for the mother and 6 months for the father. These structural challenges actually made it possible for me to become an active politician. These structural changes make it possible for all women in Iceland to have a career and a family. And I must say that gender equality is not about exceptional women achieving success. It's about structural changes that actually give all women, the same opportunities as all men. During my time as Prime Minister, I focused specifically on gender-based violence, which is something that we have to deal with as every other country in the world. And until we have eradicated gender-based violence, we cannot really say that we have full gender equality. To conclude, during a crisis, it can be tempting, when you're faced with volcanic eruptions or a pandemic or whatever, to place all the other challenges on the shelf and think, I will deal with this later. I will deal with the climate issue later. I will deal with gender equality later. But a good leader cannot do that. A good leader knows that how we deal with crisis and long-term challenges will define us and always reflect on everything else. So when we are dealing with a crisis, we need to have a very clear set of values. We need to have the right glasses on. For example, during the pandemic in Iceland, we took a decision. We did not close primary schools. We did not close early childhood education centers because we simply had them open with restrictions, because our value was that the children must have education even though there is a crisis. And I think whether we talk about gender equality, social justice, democratic freedoms, or environmental crisis, we need to bear that in mind, that our values are clear, because none of that can wait while we deal with other challenges. We must not let the crisis guide us. We must guide our people, lead by principle at the same time as we navigate through the crisis. And to do that successfully, we need to be very humble, because in times of unprecedented crisis, we do not have all the answers, even though we are leaders. We need to be human, and we need to be honest about our limitations, and we need to use our powers for the common good, because that is the best leadership at all times. Thank you very much.